Ahoy! Today we're taking a look back at the God releases of this year. I thought it would be interesting to go through the releases, talk about how they were balanced, how they were perceived by the community for their design and everything else, and see how they came out overall. That way we can potentially also see what Hi-Res could improve for future God releases or what they did well that they can repeat, and so on. Let's begin with the first God of the year, which was Mulan, who came out in February. Now, the Mulan release was messy in many ways. Mulan is a character that you could technically build a lot of hype for because she was the first really non-goddess and also non-mystical being that was introduced in SMITE in this way. We had other characters that go in the same niche to some degree before, like Bakasura or something, but in her case she was deified in SMITE specifically. She was turned into a goddess. So that was something new and unique, and that could have been hyped up a lot. And obviously Mulan is a very popular figure as well, so there's a lot that could have been done with that. That didn't happen. There were a lot of things happening at Hi-Res at the time. I don't remember what exactly it was about, but basically their entire promotion, their announcements and everything didn't work out the way they planned them to, and that led to the teasers being cut relatively short, with the main teaser being this picture of Mulan. They kind of showed her as a shrouded character. But this teaser in itself led to more confusion than actually benefiting Mulan in any way, since people assumed, me included, that this would be Mulan's design. However, it was not meant to be Mulan's design. It was supposed to show her while she is still fighting and has to hide her identity, whereas afterwards, now as the goddess, she no longer has to hide her identity and has this more feminine look. So when she was actually announced, the people that were expecting the old design to be her design and liked the old design were disappointed. The Mulan movie, which came out around the same time, it could have been a great promotion for Mulan and SMITE, just having this link between that, also completely flopped, so that wasn't really useful for Mulan's release either. Because of what I just told you, the visual design was very controversial between the people that preferred the old and the new version. Now, much later, we fortunately have a skin with the alternative option in the game that you can get, so at least there's one way this was eventually offset almost a year later. When it comes to balance, she was underpowered at release. Especially her ultimate was particularly weak because you didn't really get much survivability while ulting and you were locked in place for a very long time. As a result of that, she got a variety of different buffs. In 7.4, her spear thrust speed was buffed, and the Divine Mastery increased her protections by 30%. In 7.5, the Cross Strike Mastery bonus was increased from 5 to 10% attack speed, and in 7.7, there was an overhaul to her entire passive, making it so that it's easier to achieve with less damage done. The protection bonus on grapple was increased, and there was a slight increase in scaling on the Divine Mastery arrow. And even very recently, in patch 7.11, she received a buff to her ultimate, decreasing the cooldown by 10 seconds. So overall, she has just received buffs so far, meaning that her initial release date was definitely underpowered, and she hasn't really had a phase where she was overwhelming in any regard, but she is getting better at least. She's getting more to a average level of balance, and that's in itself a good thing. Her kit is interesting due to her evolving abilities, but at the same time, it's not outstandingly unique as a whole. This mechanic is unique, but the abilities in themselves are relatively simple. And the ability that probably stands out most in her kit is actually her 3 with the grapple mechanic onto enemies as well as onto walls and this meet in the middle thing, whereas most other things have been done in one way or another before. Between her very awkward release, the controversy surrounding her design, and her being underpowered at launch, I would say her release date was relatively bad. I think that release could have been done a lot better. I'm not saying the goddess is bad or the abilities are bad, but in terms of how she was released, there was a lot more potential there. There was a lot of hype to work with that wasn't really fulfilled in any way. The next release, Baba Yaga, who came out in April, improved upon some of those issues. Before she came out, there were many gradual teasers for the goddess, and the hype building overall was very good here. Her visual design was also great. It was what most people were hoping for when it came to Baba Yaga, after some players were concerned before that she was gonna be very young in her design or something. They really went with the old cranky woman that she's supposed to be. So in that regard, we actually saw a lot of improvements. The release balance, on the other hand, is a different story, because Baba Yaga most certainly released underpowered and also somewhat buggy at the same time. She actually received her first buff pre-release already, with the base damage and scaling of Wild Witchcraft being increased, and then in 7.4 she already got the base damage of Baba's Brew increased, she got her magical power scaling increased, and she got the burst damage of her ult increased, as well as the scaling, and the travel time was reduced, and there was also additional magical power scaling on the shield, so there was a lot of work to be done on the ultimate specifically. Blast Off later got knockback immunity and reduced damage during the pre-fire animation. The ultimate got a shorter pre-fire range, meaning you can also attack enemies that are really close to you better, and Baba Yaga was turned immune to backpedal and strafe penalties while inside a cabin. And then in 7.7, Baba's bruise damage was increased on early ranks even further, and Home Sweet Home had its health increased further. In 7.9, the cooldown of Baba's Brew was also reduced, and that is the stage she is in for now, and she's still not performing particularly well. A big issue with Baba Yaga's kit is that she's so heavily late game focused that often games don't even go long enough for her to unleash her full potential. When she gets there, she's pretty strong, but it just takes so long. At the same time, she's also very RNG dependent, and this is maybe one of the main criticisms about her kit. Her kit is unique, it brings a unique shape into the game that wasn't there, it brings the randomness between the ability shapes and the effects of the abilities. So there is a lot of interesting stuff, but it can just often end up being annoying if you don't get the thing that you need in that very moment. I would also argue that this is something that will forever hold her slightly below the point of balance, because if she is average in terms of balance, then she could suddenly be very strong with a little bit of the right RNG in the right moment, and that wouldn't feel fun for the enemies. So overall, I would say Baba Yaga was a better release than Mulan, since she was hyped a lot better and she was designed up to the expectations of players, but in terms of balance, there were still quite a few issues in the beginning. Then in June, we had the most hype release of the year, and that was Cthulhu. Cthulhu was teased beforehand and was kind of accidentally teased by SMITE data mining as a joke as well, which then actually turned out to be correct, even though it was meant as an April Fool's one. So that turned out pretty funny, but aside of that, he was also teased in good ways, and he had a really cool trailer to go along with it. So the hype building here was absolutely huge, and it even brought in some people that usually hadn't played SMITE or hadn't played SMITE in a long time. So that worked out perfectly. His visual design also went along with it. He looked as most people would expect him to look, and he had that giant form, which really stood out as something a lot of people were wondering about before, if that was even possible within SMITE. Iris has proven that it is possible, and it works with his kit. At the same time, his release balance was most certainly not ideal either, because he was significantly overpowered. As you can see here, there were already a bunch of nerfs to him pre-release, and then at 7.6 we got a cooldown increase on the ultimate, Descent to Madness. We had the damage mitigation removed during the start of it, and Transfuse nerfed in terms of max ally healing. In 7.7 there were nerfs to the base damage of the dash from Rushing Terror and the projectile as well as nerfs to the base damage of Sever. And in 7.9 Sever was nerfed even further, with the scaling also being reduced, and 7.8 in between we also had a nerf to the duration of Descent into Madness. So a ton of nerfs that led to him being around average win rate at this point, while still being an extremely strong god, especially if you're in a situation where you can't pick counters to him specifically, which means his win rate, especially in casual, is significantly higher than in ranked, which is interesting. His kit comes with a lot of unique effects, as well as obviously the ultimate itself, and with relatively high combo potential between the abilities as well, but at the same time, all the stuff in his kit leads to him clearly being very hard to balance, because you have to factor in so many different things when it comes to his damage output, his potential for teammates and so on, that it's really hard to get a good grasp on what needs to be nerfed, or maybe at some point even buffed about him, to keep him in a good place of balance, and I think that'll always be a little bit of a problem with his design. However, since all the other gods we talked about before were underpowered, I would say of the releases we've seen so far, he was probably the best release, if not the best release of the year, since the hype was massive and he brought in a massive amount of new players or returning players, and obviously the balance wasn't any better for the others. And speaking of balance, we can't forget about Tsukuyomi. The hype building here was good, though not as good as it was, for example, with Cthulhu, obviously. He had his own trailer, but it was kind of a different style, and I think it was really cool, but I heard that quite a few people didn't like it that much. But yeah, generally speaking, his whole announcement phase was a little bit more rushed, it was a little bit quicker, but still solid. His visual design was mostly perceived well too. I haven't really heard many complaints about him. Some people wanted him to look a little bit more ninja-esque, but I think overall they hit a good sweet spot for the anime fans as well and everything. So I think he turned out well in that regard. But when we talk about balance, he obviously released way overpowered. In my opinion, he released even more overpowered than Cthulhu, simply because he was much easier to pick up and play and you didn't really have to learn many mechanics to do very well with him at the start. So he got some nerfs. In 7.8, the Dark Moon Shuriken scaling was decreased. On his 2, the damage was increased for all the hits and the disarm duration was reduced. And the damage of the Silver Moon Caltrops was also reduced. The ultimate, Piercing Moonlight, also received a damage reduction. He was further nerfed though, and again got a massive amount of nerfs at once, where his 2 was nerfed in various ways when it comes to scaling and the disarm duration being nerfed again, the movement speed increase during the ability being reduced, and him no longer being immune to knockups during the ability. And then there was also further scaling nerfs to his 3 Silver Moon Caltrops, as well as a reduction of the slows and a nerf of the bonus hit afterwards, and further nerfs of the ultimate, reducing the damage mitigation as well as the scaling. So he got a lot of nerfs relatively quickly, which actually led to him dropping a fair bit in win rate to a point where he's still above the point of balance or above the average god, but not quite as crazy anymore as he was at the start. His kit has quite a few unique mechanics between the unique area denial as well as the included ranged attacks and the ultimate, but it is also very easy to pick up. It doesn't really take that much to learn to play Tsukuyomi on a base level at least. And I think this contributes to him generally performing very well, but also to him being easier to balance than Cthulhu. The changes to Cthulhu happened over time very gradually, whereas with Tsukuyomi, Hi-Rez was very clear, we're going to do these nerfs, these are the things we're taking down, a lot of numbers that we can just tweak very easily, a lot of damage numbers and everything, and that will balance him much better, and so far that seems to be going in the right direction. So overall I would say he was an okay release. He was highly popular because he was so overpowered and relatively easy to play and fun to play through that, which I think in a way works out well for new releases because it gives Hi-Rez more data as well, and at the same time there was some good hype surrounding him, some good trailers, but nothing all too crazy. I think he's not exactly a poster child of how a launch should go. And last but not least, we have Danzaburou, who hasn't fully launched at this point, but is almost out, and we know everything about his abilities and everything. So in his case, I would say we had pretty decent hype building, but it came a little bit too short before he was released. And the trailer, in my opinion, was cool, but I know that a lot of people didn't like the trailer that much. But generally speaking, he was also launched at a relatively bad time of the year where not that many people are interested in new releases. So it's not exactly like he was going to blow up massively either way, and it wasn't a known character to most people either. His visual design, in my opinion, is great. I don't think there are too many people that are unhappy with it, and that's easy as well because there weren't really any expectations for what he was supposed to look like, so Hi-Rez was very flexible. The only thing they needed to include were his 2 flasks that he has dangling from his belt, so everything else was kind of up to them, and it worked out great in my opinion. As for his release balance, we can't really talk about that yet. I do think that he's probably going to release above the point of balance. By how much is another story, so I'm not going to make further judgment on that here. I do think overall he seems like a good release, where I don't really have any major complaints, but he also doesn't stand out as a significantly crazy release. So again, not exactly a poster child of how a release should go, but that's also not really necessary at the end of the year because it's just not the most hyped time for a SMITE God release. Next season is when we're going to see the big stuff again. And that's it in terms of God releases for this year. Let me know in the comments which one was your favorite release and why. If you're new to the channel, please sub button and make the bell so you get notified of other upcoming SMITE videos. And other than that, I hope to see you for the next one soon. ZiSotto, out.